Welcome back to Enchantuer Learning. It's me Benazir Khalid. In the previous class, we were discussing about Consumer Protection Act 2019. Today, we can move to the next topic, Consumer Protection Act 1986, with certain examples. The next topic, Consumer Protection Act 1986. The moment a person comes into this world, he starts consuming. He needs clothes, milk, oil, soap, water, and many more things, and these needs keep taking one form or other all along his life. Thus, we all are consumers in the literal sense of the term. When we approach the market as a consumer, we expect value for money, that is, right quality, right quantity, right prices, information about the mode of use, etc. But there may be instances where a consumer is harassed or cheated. At the moment a person comes into his world, he starts consuming. So now we are dealing with the topic Consumer Protection Act 1986. Here, when a person comes into this world, or when one comes into this world, he starts consuming. From the time he comes into this world, he starts consuming. That means he needs clothes, milk, everything required for him, and all these needs are satisfied. He satisfies, or he or she satisfies these needs from the world. So he starts consuming everything from the beginning of his life itself. Thus, we are all consumers. For example, when we approach a market as a consumer, we expect value for money. That means when we purchase an object and a product, we should be concerned about the right quality, right quantity, right price, information about the mode of use, etc. Because there may be chances where a consumer can be cheated or harassed. The moment a person comes into this world, he starts consuming. He needs clothes, milk, oil, soap, water, and many more things, and these needs keep taking one form or other all along his life. Thus, we are all consumers. We all are consumers in the literal sense of the term. When we approach the market as a consumer, we expect value for money. That is, right quality, right quantity, right prices, information about the mode of use, etc. But there will be instances where a consumer is harassed or cheated. The government understood the need to protect consumers from unscrupulous suppliers, and several laws have been made for this purpose. We have the Indian Contract Act, the Sale of Goods Act, the Dangerous Drugs Act, the Agriculture Produce Grading and Marketing Act, the Indian Standard Institution or Certification Marks Act, the Prevention of Food Adulteration Act, the Standards of Weights and Measures Act, etc., which to some extent protect consumer interest. However, these laws require the consumer to initiate action by way of a civil suit involving lengthy legal process, which is very expensive and time consuming. So the government understood the need of a consumer, government understood the need to protect the consumers from unscrupulous suppliers. So government understood there is a need to protect these consumers from such suppliers who for this purpose, the government has made certain laws. Certain laws have been made for this purpose. These laws, such as the Indian Contract Act, the Sale of Goods Act, the Dangerous Drugs Act, the Agriculture Produce Grading and Marketing Act, the Indian Standards Institution of Certification Marks Act, the Prevention of Food Adulteration Act, the Standard of Weights and Measures Acts, etc., they come to some extent to protect consumer interest. So government understood the need to protect the consumers from the unscrupulous suppliers. So certain laws were made for this purpose, and these laws are meant to protect the consumer's interest. However, these laws require the consumer to initiate action by a way of a civil suit. So these laws helps the consumer to initiate action. If the consumer, if he is not satisfied with the supplier, or if he is not satisfied with consumption, these laws help the consumer to initiate action by the way of a civil suit, by filing a civil suit, and this civil suit involved a long, lengthy legal process, which was very expensive and time consuming. So the government understood the need to protect consumers from unscrupulous suppliers, and so for this purpose, several laws were made. And these laws, such as the Indian Contract Act, Sale of Goods Act, Dangerous Trucks Act, Agriculture Produce or Grading and Marketing Act, the Indian Standard Institution of Certification Marks Act, and the Prevention of Adulteration Act, the Standard of Weights Act and measures were made for the purpose, which purpose to protect the consumer's interest. And these laws help the consumers to initiate action by means of a civil suit, and this civil suit involves involved the legal process, which was very lengthy and very expensive and time consuming. The Consumer Protection Act 1986 was enacted to provide a simpler and quicker access to redressal of consumer grievances. The Act for the first time introduced the concept of consumer and conferred express additional rights on him. It is interesting to note that the Act doesn't seek to protect every consumer within the literal meaning of the term. The protection is meant for a person who fits in the definition of consumer given by the Act. So, the Consumer Protection Act 1986 was enacted to provide a simpler and quicker access to redressal of consumer grievances. The consumer പരാതികൾക്ക് ക്യുക്കറായിട്ട് ആക്സസ് ചെയ്യുക അല്ലെങ്കിൽ പരാതികൾ പെട്ടെന്ന് തീർപ്പാക്കുന്നതിന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് സിമ്പിളായിട്ടും പെട്ടെന്ന് തീർപ്പാക്കുന്നതിന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ടുമാണ് കൺസ്യൂമർ പ്രൊട്ടക്ഷൻ ആക്ട് 1986 ഇനാക്ട് ചെയ്തിരിക്കുന്നത്. To provide a simpler and quicker access to redressal of consumer grievances. This act for the first time introduced the concept of consumer. So, concept of consumer was first introduced in this act. And this act expressed additional rights on him. Certain additional consumer rights were added in 1986 Consumer Protection Act. It is interesting to note that the Act doesn't seek to protect every consumer with a literal meaning of the term. That means the term consumer fits in this is given by this term consumer is defined in this Act, and the proper definition is that person who fits in definition of consumer, he is only provided protection by this act. The definition which is meant to this which is mentioned in this act for the consumer, he is only given protection by this act. The protection is meant for the person who fits in definition of consumer given by the act. The Consumer Protection Act provides means to protect consumers from getting cheated or harassed by suppliers. The question arises, how a consumer will seek protection? The answer is the Act has provided a machinery whereby consumers can file their complaints, which will be entertained by the consumer forums with special powers, so that action can be taken against erring suppliers and possible compensation may be awarded to consumer for the hardships he has undergone. No court fees required to be paid to these forums. And there is no need to engage a lawyer to present the case. So what is mentioned here, a Consumer Protection Act provides means to protect consumers. Consumer Protection Act is provided to it is provided to protect the consumers from being cheated or harassed by suppliers. When a consumer is cheated or harassed, he has to be protected. That protection is given by this Consumer Protection Act 1986. And the question arises, how a consumer seek protection? How is a consumer protected? The answer is that the Act has provided a machinery whereby consumers can file their complaints. So in the Act's provision, there is consumers can file their complaints, and these complaints are entertained by the consumer forums. These consumer forums have special powers, and they take action against these suppliers. These consumer forums with special powers will take action against these suppliers, and the possible compensation may be awarded to the consumers for the sufferings that has undergone by these consumers. For this purpose, the consumer shall not pay any amount or no court fees required to be paid to these forums, and and there is no purpose and there is the consumer need not engage any lawyer to present the case. He himself can file the complaint. The Consumer Protection Act provides means to protect consumers from getting cheated or harassed by suppliers. The question arises, how a consumer will seek protection? The answer is, the Act has provided a machinery whereby consumers can file their complaints, which will be entertained by the consumer forums with special powers so that action can be taken against suppliers and a possible compensation may be awarded to consumer for hardships he has undergone. No court fees required to be paid to these forums, and there is no need to engage a lawyer to present the case. Now, who is a consumer under the Act? What are the things which can be complained against, and when and by whom a complaint can be made, and what are the relief available to consumers? Now we are going to the next portion, that is, who is a consumer under this Act, and what are the things which can be complained against, and when and by whom a complaint can be made, and what are the relief available to consumers. We are going to look into this. According to Section 2D of Consumer Protection Act 1986, it says that consumer means any person who buys any goods for a consideration which has been paid or promised, or partly paid and partly promised, or under any system of deferred payment, and includes any user of such goods other than the goods who buys such goods for consideration, paid or promised, or partly paid or partly promised, or under any system of deferred payment when such use is made with the approval of such a person, but doesn't include a person who obtains such goods for resale or for any commercial purpose, or hires or avails of any service for a consideration which has been paid or promised, or partly paid and partly promised, or under any system of deferred payment, and includes any beneficiary of such services other than the person who hires or avails of the services for consideration paid or promised, or partly paid and partly promised, or under any system of deferred payment when such services are availed of with the approval of first mentioned person. So, according to the Consumer Protection Act 1986, according to Consumer Protection Act 1986, a consumer means any person who buys goods for consideration, and that consideration may be paid or may be promised or may be partly paid or partly promised, or under any system of deferred payment. That concession can be paid or promised or partly paid or partly promised, or under any system of deferred payment, and and it includes any user of such goods other than that consumer may be any user of such goods other than the person who buys such goods for consideration, paid or promised, or partly paid or partly promised, or under any system of deferred payment when such use is made with the approval of such person. But it doesn't include a person who obtains such goods for resale or for any commercial purpose. So it is same as it is mentioned in Consumer Protection Act 2019. So it is about consumer hires or avails of any service for a consideration which has been paid or promised or partly paid and partly promised, or under any system of deferred payment, and includes any beneficiary of such services other than the person who hires or avails the service for consideration paid or promised, or partly paid and partly promised, or under any system of deferred payment when such services are availed of with the approval of first mentioned person. The definition of consumer is same as that is which is explained in Consumer Protection Act 2019. The goods are bought for consideration. So goods are bought for consideration. That means there must be a sales transaction between a seller and the buyer. The sale must be of goods. The buying of goods must be for consideration. So goods are bought for what purpose? For consideration. ഗുഡ്സ് വാങ്ങിക്കുന്നത് കൺസിഡറേഷൻ ആണ്, അതായത് മണി കൊടുത്താണ് ഗുഡ്സ് വാങ്ങിക്കുന്നത്. അപ്പം ആ മണി എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് പേ ചെയ്തതായിരിക്കാം, പ്രോമിസ് ചെയ്തതായിരിക്കാം, എനിക്ക് പാർട്ട്ലി പെയ്ഡ് ആയിരിക്കാം, പാർട്ട്ലി പ്രോമിസ്ഡ് ആയിരിക്കാം അല്ലെ. അപ്പം ഗുഡ്സ് എന്ന് കൺസിഡറേഷന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ടാണ് വാങ്ങിക്കുന്നത്. ദാറ്റ് മീൻസ് there must be a sale transaction between a seller and a buyer, and the sale must be of goods, and buying of goods must be the for consideration. The sale must be of goods, and goods should be bought for consideration. Should be bought for consideration. Goods should be bought for consideration. The terms sale, goods and consideration have not been defined in Consumer Protection Act. So in Consumer Protection Act, sale, goods, consideration, these terms are not defined. The meaning of the term sale and goods is to be construed according to the Sale of Goods Act. So sale and goods, the meaning, both the terms sale and goods is mentioned in the Sale of Goods Act. And the meaning of the term consideration is mentioned according to the Indian Contract Act. So that is all about the goods are bought for consideration. Any person who uses the goods with the approval of the buyer is a consumer. Next one, any person who buys the good, who uses the goods with the approval of the buyer is also a consumer. So goods are bought for consideration. Now any person who uses the goods with the approval of the buyer is also a consumer. Consumer എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ബയറിന്റെ അപ്രൂവലോടൊപ്പം തന്നെ ഒരു ഗുഡ്സ് യൂസ് ചെയ്യുന്ന പേഴ്സണും ഒരു കൺസ്യൂമർ ആണ്. That means when a person buys goods, that goods may be used by his family members, relatives as well as friends. Any person who is making actual use of the goods may come across defects in goods. So here the goods must be bought by one person, and the other person must be using it, and that person may be his family member, relative, or friends. So the actual user is the other person. Any person who making the actual use of the goods can come across the defects in goods, so he can complain against about the defects in goods. The second person who is that means the buyer, for he is the one who makes the who gives approval for the other person to use it. So that person is also a consumer, and he also can, the second person is also a consumer, and then he can also file complaints in case of defective goods. Thus, the law construes users of the goods as consumers, although he may not be buyers at the same time. So here the law is applicable to the second person also, even though he doesn't purchase the goods by himself, he can be a consumer. The words with the approval of the buyer in the definition denotes that the user of goods should be a rightful user. So the word with the approval of buyer means that goods is used by the second person with the approval of the buyer. In that sense, he can be also called a consumer. And the second person also have the rights of a consumer. Let us move to some examples. First example. A purchased a scooter which was in B's possession from the date of purchase. B was using it and taking to the seller for repairs and service from time to time. Later on, B had a complaint regarding the scooter. He sued the seller. The seller pleaded that since B did not buy the scooter, he was not a consumer under the Act. The Delhi State Commission held that B, the complainant, was using it with the approval of A, the buyer, and therefore he was the consumer under the Act. Dinesh Bajaj vs. Bajaj Auto Limited, 1992, 3 CPG 272. Here, we should not one thing, this is an exception to the general rule of law, that is stranger to a contract cannot sue. Okay, shall we move to the example? A purchased a scooter which was in B's possession from the date of purchase. B was using it and taking it to the seller for repairs and service from time to time. Later on, B had a complaint regarding the scooter. He sued the seller. The seller pleaded that since B didn't buy the scooter, he was not a consumer under Act. The Delhi State Commission held that B, the complainant, was using it with the approval of A, the buyer, and therefore he was consumer under the Act. Dinesh Bhagat vs. Bajaj Auto Limited, 1992, 3 CPJ 272. Not, this is an exception to the general rule of law that a stranger to a contract cannot sue. So here, A purchased a scooter which was in B's possession from the date of purchase. So here A is purchasing the scooter which was in B's possession from the date of purchase. From the date of purchase, the possession was provided to B. B was using it and taking to the seller for repairs and service from time to time. So who purchased the scooter? A purchased, but he provided the scooter, or the possession was given to B, and B was using it and taking to the seller for repairs and service from time to time. He is repairing repairs. He is repairing and providing service to the scooter. But later on, B had a complaint regarding the scooter. Later, B had a complaint regarding the scooter. Then he filed a case against the seller. The seller pleaded that seller approached the court and he said that since B did not buy the scooter, he was not a consumer under the act. According to the seller, told that since B had not purchased the scooter directly from him, so he says that B is not a consumer under this act. The Delhi State Commission held that B, the complainant, was using it with the approval of A. So the Delhi State Commission held that what B is the complainant. He was using it with the approval of the A. Approval of A. That means the buyer. Therefore, he was consumer under this act. So according to the definition of consumer in 1986 Act, Consumer Protection Act provisions, what is it mentioned there? It's mentioned that anyone who buy, if any person buys a product or purchase a product and another person consume it with the approval of the first one, he can also be called as a consumer. That is what is mentioned in this case, and this case is Dinesh Bhagat versus Vedat Auto Limited, 1992, 3 CPJ 272. Here a special note is given, that is there is an exception to this in the Contract Act. In the Contract Act, a stranger cannot he cannot file a suit. Any person who obtains the goods for resale or commercial purpose is not a consumer. So who is not a consumer? A person who obtains goods for resale or commercial purpose. If a person obtains goods for the purpose of resale or commercial purpose, he is not considered as a consumer. That means the term for resale implies that the goods are bought for the purpose of selling them, and expression for commercial purpose is intended to cover cases other than those of resale of goods. That means a term for resale, it specifies the term resale. What's meant? That means the goods are bought for the purpose of resale. And the expression commercial purpose, that means the goods are provided for resale. So here the goods are used for commercial purpose. So those persons who are buying goods or commercially exploiting them, then such persons or such a buyer or such user cannot be defined as a consumer under this act. Let us move to an example. A jeep was purchased to run it as a taxi. The question was whether the buyer of the jeep was a consumer under the act. The Rajasthan State Commission held that to use the jeep as a taxi with the object to earn profits was a commercial purpose, and therefore the buyer or the user was not a consumer within the meaning of act. Meaning of the act: Srimad Pushpa Meena versus Shah Enterprises, Rajasthan Limited, 1991, 1 CPR 229. So the case mentioned here is a jeep was purchased to run it as a taxi. So jeep was purchased for what purpose? To run it as a taxi. The question was whether the buyer of the jeep was a consumer under this act. Whether the buyer was a consumer under this act, the Rajasthan State Commission held that the jeep was used as a taxi for the purpose of earning profit. The object to earn profit. So it was used for commercial purpose. So as the case is it is used for profit earning. So the buyer or user cannot be treated as a consumer according to the act. That was what is mentioned in this case. Srimati Pushpa Meena versus Shah Enterprises, Rajasthan Limited, 1991, 1 CPR 229. Let us move to another problem. L Limited purchased a computer system from Z. The computer system was giving constant trouble and Z was not attending it properly. L Limited filed a complaint against Z with the National Commission. Z contended that L Limited was not a consumer under the Act because computer system was used for commercial purpose. L Limited argued that computer system was not directly used for commercial purpose, rather it was used to facilitate the work of company. The commission rejected the argument on the grounds that the state made part of the assets of the company and its expenses were met by it out of business income. Thus, the said purchase was a purchase for commercial purpose and L Limited was held not to be a consumer under this act. So, according to this problem, L Limited company purchased a computer system from Z. The computer system was giving constant trouble. So, as Z was not and Z was not attending it properly. Then what L did? L Limited filed a complaint against Z with the National Commission. Then Z contend that L Limited was not a consumer under the Act because he used the computer system for commercial purpose. So L Limited filed a case against Z, but Z told, I think Isad what was the opinion of Isad. The Isad says that he was not the L Limited was not a consumer under this act because he used the computer system for commercial purpose. Then L Limited argued that the computer system was not directly used for commercial purpose. It was used to facilitate the work of company. So the L Limited argued, that company argued that computer system was not used for commercial purpose, not directly used for commercial purpose, but it was used to facilitate the work of company. The commission rejected the argument on the grounds that system made part of the assets of the company and its expenses were made by it of the business income. So the company rejected this L Limited's argument on which grounds, on the grounds that the system made part of the asset, or that means the system was a part of the assets of the company and its expenses were met by the business income, met by it out of the business income. The system was a part of the assets of the company and its expense were met by the business income. So that system was here considered to be used for commercial purpose. So according to the commission, the system is used for commercial purpose. Thus, the said purchase was not a purchase; it was a purchase of commercial means, and so L Limited was not held to be a consumer under this act. Person buying goods for self-employment is a consumer. That is, a person who buys goods for self-employment is a consumer. We shall look into some examples. When goods are bought for commercial purpose and such a purchase satisfy the following criteria. For commercial purpose, when goods are bought for commercial purpose ആണ് goods വാങ്ങിക്കുന്നതെങ്കിൽ അത്തരം പർച്ചേസിന് ഈ പറയുന്ന ക്രൈറ്റീരിയ ഒക്കെ സാറ്റിസ്ഫൈ ചെയ്യണം. എന്തൊക്കെയാണ്? ഒന്ന്, the goods are used with the buyer himself. Even though it's bought for commercial purpose, that goods must be used by the buyer himself, and it should be used for the purpose of earning his own livelihood. So the goods, if the goods are bought for commercial purpose, then that goods must be used by the buyer himself and it should be used for the purpose of earning his livelihood, and that means by means of self-employment. Then such use would not be termed as used for commercial purpose under the act and the user is recognized as a consumer. So when a person buys goods for self-employment, he can be considered as a consumer. That means their goods are not used for commercial purpose. Goods are used for the purpose of the buyer himself and it is meant for the purpose of earning his own livelihood, and that means by means of self-employment. So he cannot be treated, that is not coming under the criteria of commercial purpose. So he can be considered as a consumer according to this act. For example, A buys a truck for for playing it as a public carrier by himself, and A is a consumer. A is buying a truck for the purpose of using it as a public carrier by himself. He is using it as a public carrier for himself. So he can be considered as a consumer. In the second case, A buys a truck and hires a driver to play it, then A is not a consumer. In the second case, A buys a truck, but he hires that driver to maintain it, then he is not considered as a consumer. First case, he uses for himself, so he can be considered as a consumer. In the second case, he buys a truck and hires the truck driver, so he cannot be considered as a consumer. A has one cloth shop. He starts another business of a photocopier and buys a photocopy machine therefore. Third example, A has one cloth shop. Next, he starts another business of a photocopier and buys a photocopy machine therefore. He has not bought this machine exclusively for the purpose of earning livelihood. So, whether he can be a consumer under this act? No, he can't be a consumer under this act because he is not buying such and such products for the purpose of, he is not buying these products for the purpose of earning livelihood. So he is purchasing these products for commercial purpose. So he cannot be considered as a consumer under this act. What is mentioned here? Person buying goods for self-employment is a consumer. So you have to note the point that if the person uses, he buys goods for commercial purpose, for the purpose of self-employment, that means for his own livelihood, he can be considered as a consumer. So that is, there is an exception to the rule that a buyer of a commercial goods is not a consumer under this act. But if he buys goods for commercial purpose, that means for his own livelihood, he uses those goods for the purpose of his own livelihood, then he can be considered as a consumer according to this provision of this Consumer Protection Act. That is all about Consumer Protection Act 1986. Hope you all understood the following facts. Today we are dealing about Consumer Protection Act 1986 and we discuss certain examples related to it. Hope you all understood. In the next coming video, we shall move to the next remaining topics. Till then, it's bye from me.